Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today, I want to take a look at the work of the 18th century painter and engraver William Hogarth. His works, of which there are many, frequently take on a moralising character. For contemporary historians and artists, Hogarth's work provides a fascinating window, albeit a stylised and often satirical one, on life in the 1700s. We see the inside of homes, we see street scenes, but above all, we are often being shown the aspects of life and society that cause concern for Hogarth and presumably for enough other people to ensure that his works had a sufficient audience to make their creation worthwhile. I'm going to be focusing on a pair of images by Hogarth today, which is frankly a veritable drop in the ocean when it comes to his full body of work. But if you do find this particular look interesting, please do let me know, because I would love to examine more examples of his work in a future video, or indeed future videos, if that is something that you would be keen on as well. But as for now, it's time for us to jump into the life and work of William Hogarth. William Hogarth was born on the 10th of November 1697 in the parish of St Bartholomew the Great in Smithfield, London. His father, Richard Hogarth, was a schoolmaster who also published Latin and Greek textbooks. When William was around 5 or 6, his father started to run a Latin-speaking coffee house, which I know might sound like a fairly niche enterprise, but being completely honest, I can think of a few areas where a business like this would do an absolutely roaring trade today. Unfortunately for Richard, his enterprise evidently did not garner that level of popularity, as within 4 or 5 years, the coffee house represented a financial failure that would result in him being imprisoned in the Fleet as a debtor, from where he would not be released until 1712. His son William would be turning 15 in the year of his father's release. Richard Hogarth died on the 11th of May 1718. He was survived by his wife Anne. She was the mother of his 3 children, William, Mary and Anne. William Hogarth would, in later life, write, in a manner that Jenny Uglow describes as a, quote, terse third person, that, quote, his father's pen, like that of many other authors, was incapable of more than putting him in a way to shift for himself, and so he served apprenticeship to a silver plate engraver. According to David Bindman, this apprenticeship was undertaken, quote, in the undistinguished silver workshop of Ellis Gamble in Cranbourne Street, Leicester Fields, London, where he remained from February 1714, probably until early 1720. Bindman then proceeds to suggest that, quote, Hogarth's determination to rise in the world may have had its origins in the family's early misfortunes, and rise he certainly would. In 1720, the year that his apprenticeship finished, Hogarth began to offer his services as a copper engraver. He created bespoke printed works for his array of clients. He also used this craft and his skill in it to generate some of the work that he is arguably best known for today, namely his satirical and moralising prints. The earliest extant example of this being his emblematical print on the South Sea scheme. This piece was produced in 1721, in the aftermath of, and in response to, the fiscal mismanagement that led to hundreds of people losing life-changing sums of money to the so-called South Sea bubble. By 1720, the price of stock in the South Sea Company had been allowed to rise, or was rather forced up, to such a point that a financial bubble was created. And when that bubble burst, the investors, most principally the most recent investors, those who had therefore paid the most, would lose nearly everything. Before long, Hogarth would be seeking to expand his revenue streams by monetising his skills as a painter, This was following, some have suggested, tutoring by James Thornhill. By the end of the 1520s, Hogarth had begun work on his paintings that were based on John Gay's The Beggar's Opera. At around this same time, on the 23rd of March 1729, William Hogarth married Jane Thornhill. It was alleged that he had eloped with her. Hogarth was now the son-in-law of one of the most celebrated and well-connected artists of his age. Thornhill was the individual who had been tasked, among the countless other commissions that he had obtained, with painting the interior of the dome of the recently completed St Paul's Cathedral. In addition, James Thornhill was also the Member of Parliament for Weymouth and Melcombe Regis. And thus, Hogarth was, through this marriage, now far better connected than he ever was before. The works of Hogarth that I wish to focus on today were issued in 1751, and so this does require us skipping over 2 decades of work by this individual, and in those decades he was prolific. As I have already mentioned, I would be very happy to make a follow-up video, or indeed videos, on Hogarth and his works, if that would be of interest, so please do let me know. Today, though, we're going to be taking a look at Gin Lane and its companion piece, Beer Street. For some additional and I believe necessary context to Hogarth's artistic creations at this time, we should look to Henry Fielding. He was the novelist and magistrate who founded the Bow Street Runners, and the Bow Street Runners have been named as the earliest professional police force in Britain. In January 1751, Fielding published an inquiry into the causes of the late increase of robbers. F. Untle describes it as an, quote, elaborate pamphlet with systematic remedial proposals, very middle class in outlook, and undoubtedly progressive in its own day, that made a very great impression and initiated a revision of the penal laws in Parliament. In the inquiry, Fielding tried to get to the roots of criminality so far as he saw them. Hogarth's Gin Lane and Beer Street appeared on the market within a few weeks of Fielding's text being published, and as we will see, Hogarth's thesis on this matter is pretty evident. The, as he saw it, scourge of drunkenness caused by gin bore much of the responsibility for any degradation in society, morality and public health that may be being observed. The gin craze, as it would come to be known, had been fuelled by both domestic and international events. In 1689, so decades before Hogarth created his Gin Lane, England and her allies were at war with France, again. As a result, Parliament banned the importation of French wines and spirits, and also ended the domestic monopoly on their production. And so in response, a veritable swarm of distilleries sprang up across the countries, and so the availability of distilled liquor skyrocketed. Ernest L. Abel explains that the result of this was that, quote, the cost of gin fell below the cost of beer and ale, and gin drinking became the favourite alcoholic beverage among the inferior class. British statistical abstracts put the annual consumption of gin in England and Wales in 1700 at about 1.23 million gallons. By 1714, consumption was up to almost 2 million gallons per year. By 1735, it was 6.4 million gallons, and by 1751, 7.05 million gallons. In terms of population, per capita consumption increased by up to 8-fold, from between 1 and 2 pints in 1700 to between 8 and 9 pints, about a gallon per person, in 1751. Beer consumption for the same period remained relatively constant, at 3 million gallons a year. Numerous attempts to regulate the sale of spirits, to increase the cost of purchasing them, and to ensure the quality of distilled alcohol had come to nothing. Indeed, it would not be until the summer of 1751, so a few months after Fielding's text and Hogarth's images were published, that a Gin Act came into force that actually began to effect a positive change on the situation. In Hogarth's Beer Street, the viewer is presented with a scene of abundance. Happy people enjoying their beer and each other in a place where industriousness and plenty are shown to be the order of the day. The location is Westminster. In the bottom left corner, we see a smiling butcher, identifiable by his knife sharpener, enjoying a frothy beer with a blacksmith, or potentially he may be a cooper, i.e. someone who made beer barrels. His tongs, the tools of his trade, are shown sitting in his apron strings. The blacksmith or cooper holds aloft a beer in one hand and a frankly enormous hunk of meat in the other. He holds a long clay tobacco pipe between his teeth. Here we see a person who has the money and the inclination to enjoy a variety of consumables. They are sharing their table with a pair of lovers. It has been suggested that the man may be either a pavior or perhaps a drayman, while the lady is thought to be a housemaid. She holds a key. This is a sign of her domestic duties and also of her continued thought and concern for them, even when she is away from those labours because she is on Beer Street with her lover. The open pamphlet on the table is a copy of the King's speech, because beer drinkers are also responsible citizens who make it their business to concern themselves with the important matters of state. The topic of this particular speech, we see, was, quote, the advancement of our commerce and cultivating of the arts of peace. Two fish sellers sit side by side. They appear to be singing from an English ballad sheet. So here they are, enjoying a traditional English entertainment alongside their traditional English beer. Their baskets are shown to be full to the brim with their produce, a sign of the ready availability of goods in the world of Beer Street and also the willingness of the people who spend their time there to rely on and engage in honest trading. There is a basket of books, tied down, which appear to have no owner. Certainly, they seem to be being ignored by everyone in this scene. These have been described as a collection of books that William Hogarth did not like. A pawnbroker's shop sits behind this basket of books. This is the only building to be shown in disrepair in this whole scene. The pawnbroker, N. Pinch, reaches out through a hole in his door to take a cup of beer. This has been read as him attempting to avoid seizure of either himself and or his goods by debt collectors. Evidently, there is little call for the pawnbroker's trade in this community. In the middle back of the image, a building is shown encased in scaffolding, and upon its roof, we see men going busily and happily about their work. This is a place of affluence, where building works can be done without delay, except for in the case of the pawnbroker, of course. In front of this building, a buxom woman is being carried in a sedan chair. She has the money to afford the luxury of this personal means of travel. Her porters are, however, shown to be struggling with their rather well-fed load. But seemingly, this is nothing that a little rest, a dab of the brow, and a sip of beer can't fix. Almost everyone in this image is shown to be plump and well-dressed. Apart from, that is, the individual who is shown painting a sign up a ladder. He is gaunt. His clothing is ragged. But he is painting an advert for a distiller, a place where gin could be purchased, and it looks very much like a bottle of gin is hanging beside his work as he does it. He is a worker in the gin trade, and possibly a consumer too. His appearance and his presence in this image is then a reminder of the dangers of gin, of its potential to infiltrate, even to corrupt more salubrious locations like Beer Street. And after all, this Beer Street print was intended to appear side by side with this image of Gin Lane. Gin Lane is set in the less affluent area of St Giles, and the contrast between the images is intended to be stark. In Gin Lane, S. Gripes Pawnbrokers is doing a roaring trade. He is not hiding from debt collectors. His building is not in a state of disrepair. Indeed, his is one of the only buildings to look well kept. Although I do wonder who is doing the work to maintain his building, as this pawnbroker is being handed tools by tradesmen in this image. These individuals are giving up their ability to work in order, presumably, to obtain money for gin. In front of Gripe's shop, we see two children. one of whom is sharing a meatless bone with a dog. This is quite the contrast to that hunk of meat that was being held aloft on Beer Street. The sign beneath these children advertises the Gin Royal Bar, and above this door is inscribed, quote, "Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2p, clean straw for nothing." The last part of this refers to them allowing you to pass out on their straw their hay bales for free. A ragged, bare-breasted and nearly insensate woman sits upon the stairs. The marks we can see on her leg are believed to be signs of venereal disease, which was most likely intended to indicate that she earned her money through sex work. We see how careless she is of the baby she holds, who is shown to be falling at least one story from out of her arms, while she, still smiling, pinches absent-mindedly at the snuff in her lap. This woman is the very epitome of that long-standing message of gin being mother's ruin. In front of her sits a man. He is dead, or nearly dead. He is skeletal and yet still gripping the neck of the bottle in his basket. There is also a pamphlet poking out of that basket entitled "The Downfall of Madam Gin." Even with this information at his fingertips, he would not be spared from that downfall himself. A dog sits beside him, casting a forlorn and sorrowful figure. We can see a woman who is being transported in a wheelbarrow. I think the implication is that she is clearly too intoxicated to walk, but despite this, we can see that her companion is giving her more gin. Behind this wheelbarrow, a violent crowd has assembled. At least one carries a crutch, while others are shown to be bandaged. Perhaps this group represents those rioters who, it was feared, would come out against any legislation that might make gin less attainable for them. This rough-and-tumble group scuffle before the Killman distillery, the name no doubt being a clue to the effect that their product has on their consumers. Two small female figures are standing beside this fighting crowd. One has a badge with the letters SG visible upon her arm. This means that these are children who were the wards of the parish of St Giles. Despite their youth, we can see that they appear to be already spending their time drinking gin. However, if the woman and baby in front of them are anything to go by, these girls might have been consuming gin for many years already, as we can see that this woman is feeding a glass of gin to the infant. Beside the distillery is what appears to be a barber's shop, if the striped pole sticking out of it is anything to go by. This building is in a poor state of repair, and the crumbling walls reveals a man who is hanging. Is it possible that this is the barber himself? Unable to make a living anymore, as his former customers are now spending all of their money on gin. Is it possible that he spent all of his money on gin as well? 2 doors down from this possible barber shop, we are shown a building collapsing, masonry falling to the ground. No one has the care, concern, and/or currency to have rectified this matter within this community. A man walks, perhaps dances through this street in what appears to be a state of extreme distraction. He holds bellows on his head in place of a hat. It may be that he is hitting himself with them. And he carries a spike upon which a baby has been impaled. Running behind him is a horrified, screaming woman. Is she perhaps this child's mother? Beside this scene of horror, a coffin sits upon the ground. The nearly naked body of a woman is being placed inside. A child sits beside this coffin and seems to be weeping. Has gin left this child an orphan? Jonathan White writes that, quote, "In Gin Lane, by contrast to Beer Street, desire has run insane, having become a form of ersatz pleasure. The economy of Gin Lane, located in the impoverished parish of St Giles, is dark and predatory, peopled by those who profit from the destruction of degraded labourers, pawnbrokers, distillers, and undertakers." The captions beneath each of these prints further hammers home their respective themes and arguments. For Beer Street, the caption reads as follows: "Beer, happy produce of our isle, can sinewy strength impart, and wearied with fatigue and toil can cheer each manly heart. Labour and art upheld by thee successfully advance. We quaff thy balmy juice with glee, and water leave to France. Genius of health, thy grateful taste rivals the cup of Jove, and warms each English generous breast with liberty and love. While Gin Lane is rendered thus: Gin, cursed fiend, with fury fraught, makes human race a prey. It enters by a deadly draught, and steals our life away. Virtue and truth, driven to despair, its rage compels to fly, but cherishes with hellish care theft, murder, perjury. Damned cup, that on the vitals preys, that liquid fire contains, which madness to the heart conveys, and rolls it through the veins. When announcing, in the General Advertiser of the 13th of February 1751, that these prints would soon be made available for purchase, William Hogarth asserted that, quote, "As the subjects of these prints are calculated to reform some reigning vices peculiar to the lower class of people, in hopes to render them of more extensive use, the author has published them in the cheapest manner possible." William Hogarth then, in his own words, had a message that he wished to see spread as far and as wide as possible. He hoped, I think, that he could reform behaviour, but even if this was not the case, at the very least, he could increase the general acceptance for the legislation that he believed would, and indeed should, come into force just a few months later. As it was, he would prove to be correct, because the 1751 Act, known as the Tippling Act, would come into force. This Act imposed a £5 annual licence fee on distillers, and it also prohibited those distillers from either selling or allowing liquor to be consumed on their premises where they were distilling gin. As a result, lots of gin shops began to close. Anyone who sought to flout this new law, to create and sell bootleg gin, were faced with fairly hefty punishments if they were caught. According to the UK Parliament website, quote, "If people were found to be in violation of the Act, they could be fined up to £10, sentenced to 3 months hard labour, or transported to any of His Majesty's plantations for up to 7 years." So what do you think? Do you think that the changing fortunes and struggles of William Hogarth's early life affected his creative output later? Did he perhaps see things or meet people in his youth that would later inspire these moralising prints? Perhaps you think it was the circles he moved in later, those circles that were made possible by both his artistic skill and his marriage to Jane Thornhill, that were the things that turned his mind and his craft to the betterment of the, quote, lower class of people. Or maybe you think it was a bit of both. What do you think of these works and the possible effect they may have had on their viewers? And lastly, and once again, are there any other works by Hogarth that you would like me to focus on in particular for a future video? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. I would also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement. And the more engagement a video gets, the more YouTube shares it out, and that will help us to grow this community. As we've been talking about artists, maybe something paintbrushy, portraity, I am looking forward to seeing what you pick. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please do share it with your friends. If you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me that you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, have a little check now, just to make sure that you haven't been mysteriously unsubscribed against your will by somebody who's definitely not YouTube. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button, and then select all in the drop-down menu that will appear, and that way YouTube claims they will tell you when I've next uploaded, and also when I am next going live, which I do to talk about the history news, and I know you are not going to want to miss that. We do, of course, now have a failsafe. Please head over to my website, www.katrinamarchant.com. I'm showing it on screen now. If you head to the contact page, you will see a little box. Put your email in that box, and that will add you to the mailing list. And that way I can send you an email once a week to let you know what I'm up to and to also send you any links that you might find useful too. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye for now.